Revenge with Karen. I knew Alex was going to be a problem the minute he called the backup server a vintage hard drive museum. This is the same kid who once thought VPN was a new gaming console. But I said nothing, just nodded, smiled, and kept my hands on the wheel like I had for the last 11 years. My job wasn't to teach the boss's son how not to tank the company. My job was to quietly keep it from falling apart while he figured out how to tie his digital shoelaces. They called me Ops Compliance, the firewall whisperer, depending on who was panicking and what systems were on fire. No fancy title, no framed certificates. I was the person they called when a regulatory agency sent a scary letter or when logs didn't add up before quarterly reporting. Everyone else put out fires with meetings. I did it with encrypted backups, midnight audits, and a muttered prayer that someone upstream hadn't lied on a form again. Spoiler, they had. It wasn't always like this. There was a time years back when we were a scrappy little team trying to stay alive in a competitive field. But as we grew, well, the rot started to set in. Data discrepancies here, an internal audit that mysteriously never made it to legal there. I didn't raise alarms. I just started copying things quietly. A time-stamped report here, a file tree backup there, hash verification, password protected, stored when nobody could accidentally wipe it. I told myself it wasn't whistleblowing. Just insurance for the company, for me. And yeah, if you're still listening, and like stories where the quiet one finally gets to watch the whole circus implode from a beach chair, maybe toss a like and subscribe. So, it helps the team keep digging into these twisted office sagas. You'd be shocked how many there are. Now, back to the slow burn disaster. See, I started noticing little things. Not the kind you can shout about in a meeting without sounding paranoid. Just patterns. Numbers not matching logs. Projects marked closed that still had active vendor pipelines. Reimbursement reports that listed trips to regional offices we hadn't operated in since 2017. I'm not saying it was fraud. Not then. It smelled like someone upstairs was sweeping filings under rugs and hoping nobody lifted the corners. So I did what I always do. I made a folder. Noteworthy discrepancies Q1. Then a second Q2 corrections unfiled. By the end of that year, I had a system. Encrypted archives of every audit trail, every compliance document with conflicting versions. Because here's the fun part about regulatory filings. Once it's signed, it's gospel. If your gospel is built on doctored spreadsheets and deleted logs, and an actual regulator shows up, you don't get fined. You get buried. Nobody knew what I was doing, not even legal. I wasn't hiding it out of guilt. I was hiding it because I'd seen what happened to the last person who raised their hand. They got restructured. Their systems were gone by lunch. Their badge stopped working mid-coffee. 1 minute a trusted pillar, the next vanished. So no, I didn't go to anyone. I just made sure that if the storm came, I'd have dry land to stand on. And then came the golden boy himself. Alex, fresh from a semester and a half of community college business classes and daddy's money, newly crowned as VP of Digital Infrastructure, which apparently now included compliance oversight, server architecture, and security access management. The only thing this guy knew how to consolidate was blame. Day one, he marched into IT like a substitute teacher on a power trip and started pulling cables, metaphorically and literally. He said we had too many legacy systems, like redundant compliance nodes. That was me, by the way. I was the node. To be fair, I don't think he was malicious, just stupid. Stupid in that brand name way where you don't have to know what you're doing because no one will ever call you on it. He started issuing access reports, stuff I'd already filed, deleted what he called duplicate logs, asked HR why we were still running monthly access audits manually. Because automation, he said, efficiency, innovation. And still I said nothing. I just kept back things up. Because by then, I'd seen him delete 3 months of access logs after someone from accounting asked why a vendor was logging in after hours. I'd seen him merge 2 totally unrelated datasets for a quarterly report and say, good enough. I'd seen him approve software updates without version control, which, if you've ever dealt with a compliance audit, feels like handing your house keys to a raccoon. I didn't stop him. I didn't argue. I made another folder. This one was labeled, If I Get Fired. And I started to fill it. You ever watch a toddler try to operate a blender? That's what it felt like when Alec got his hands on admin privileges. Except instead of a smoothie, it was our regulatory exposure on the line. His first day with full access, he walked into the server room like he was entering a nightclub. Sunglasses on, latte in hand, pointing at machines like he was picking toppings at a frozen yogurt bar. What's this one do? That's the SFTP node that handles quarterly tax doc encryption. Cool. Do we still need it? He didn't wait for answers. By the end of the week, he'd yanked 3 redundant systems offline. Redundant only in the sense that they backed up the stuff his shiny new dashboards couldn't read. You know, things like incident logs, HR access histories, and asset movement trails. Real boring stuff, real important stuff. He called them old school crutches. Said we needed to be leaner, faster, more agile. Like compliance is a CrossFit class and not the reason we weren't getting sued into the Earth's crust every quarter. I kept my mouth shut. I'd learned by now. Speak up and you get labelled resistant to change. Quietly protect the company and maybe, just maybe, you keep your job long enough to retire before the fallout hits. So I watched as he nuked a decade of carefully constructed redundancies, and I started tracking what was missing. Quietly, again. The worst part wasn't the deletions. It was the arrogance. One morning, he pinged me on Slack with a screenshot of a report I had submitted 2 weeks prior. Complete with the correct access logs, timestamps, everything. This is what I need from you ASAP. That's literally the one I sent you. No, I need it in my new format. Old one's obsolete, doesn't integrate with our dashboard. The dashboard you built last week? Exactly, streamlined. He streamlined a lot, including 6 years of access logs from our European partner database, which he wiped because GDPR's just European nonsense anyway, so. I flagged it in a private memo. I copied the last intact versions from our off-site archive. I moved the memo to my encrypted just-in-case folder. I didn't tell him a thing. Then came the first real sign that something had gone seriously sideways. While reviewing the audit trail for a quarterly vendor check-in, I noticed a series of deletions in our internal access logs. At first, I thought it was a script malfunction. Sometimes auto-archiving can do weird things if permissions overlap. But this wasn't automation. It was targeted. Specific log clusters selectively removed, all in the last 3 weeks. All correlating with third-party vendor access, which, to be clear, is the kind of thing federal inspectors lose their minds over. When I pulled the server error reports from the backup buffer, I found access entries that no longer existed in the primary system. According to the official logs, no one had touched that vendor gateway in months. According to the backups, someone, possibly Alex, possibly someone using his credentials, had been logging in at 2:14 a.m. 4 nights in a row to run batch exports from our internal finance systems. That's not just sloppy. That's lawsuit level. I brought it up with a colleague in legal. Casual, like hey, hypothetically, if someone were deleting vendor access logs but still pulling, would that be a red flag? She went quiet, then said, "Only if you like your company solvent." So yeah, I made more backups. But I also started printing physical copies. I know, paper trail. Who does that anymore? But when your digital logs are vanishing into the void and your new boss thinks a checksum is something you do at brunch, sometimes the dead tree version is your only insurance. I stored them off-site. I labeled them like tax records, made copies of the copies. Because Alex wasn't just reckless. He was erasing the company's history, one keystroke at a time. And everyone above me was too busy praising his disruption to notice the fire behind the glass. He had the badge, he had the access. But he didn't know that every time he deleted something, I saved it twice. Once for the company, and once for me. There's a moment when you stop trying to fix the machine and start documenting its collapse. Mine came on a Tuesday, rainy cold. One of those mornings where the coffee tastes like wet cardboard and the office smells like ozone and printer panic. I'd just run a cross-check on our internal audit logs again and came up with the same nightmare. Entire sessions gone. No login, no logout, no record of access, just gaps. Like someone had gone in with an eraser and surgically scrubbed out anything that could tie them to real-time violations. That's when I crossed the line from loyal employee to unofficial archivist of corporate disaster. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I wasn't planning revenge. Hell, I didn't even want to leave. I just knew that if anyone ever audited us for real, like federal boots on the ground kind of audit, we'd go down in flames and my name would be on half the signature lines. I'd be the last known compliance officer on record. For the years Alex was busy pretending to run a startup inside a Fortune 500. So I started pulling compliance snapshots. Not just 1 or 2 reports, full sweeps, access logs, vendor contracts, deleted user trails, shadow systems, everything. I wrote my own little script, something harmless that piggybacked off the nightly backup routines. It zipped, time-stamped, hashified, and encrypted every file. Sent it to a drive only I controlled. I named it after my grandmother's cat, just in case someone nosy got curious. The encryption wasn't just to hide it from prying eyes. It was insurance. Proof that what I had was untouched, unaltered, undeniable. If I ever needed to drop it in front of a lawyer or a regulator, the file hashes would speak for themselves. No edits. No, she faked this after getting fired. Just raw truth locked in math. And the thing is, I wasn't the only one noticing the cracks. Someone from finance pinged me asking if I knew why their access logs from last quarter were showing empty tables. Then another from risk management wondering why certain audit trails were showing error not found. I played dumb. Must be a sync issue. Let me look into it. Meanwhile, my drive was steadily filling with the ghosts of a company slowly deleting itself. I got bold. Not careless, never careless, but bold. started including flagged items in the backups. Items I wasn't supposed to have access to anymore. Alex had yanked a bunch of team permissions when he took over. But he didn't know where all the skeleton keys lived. He didn't revoke access to the old cache servers. He didn't disable legacy routing scripts. He didn't even change the default admin passwords on the sandbox environments. So, I wandered through the system like a ghost in my own house, collecting evidence of our decay. A flagged vendor contract that hadn't passed legal review, but was still active. An internal email chain where a VP admitted they were pushing a product with the known defects. And the real kicker? A compliance override, dated and signed by Alex himself, clearing a vendor from background checks because, get this, they're friends of the family. That one went in its own folder. I called it ignition. I kept everything. I encrypted everything, not to leak it, not to weaponize it, but because if the day came when someone stood in a boardroom and asked, "How did this happen?" I wanted the answer to be ready. I didn't trust legal to keep it. I didn't trust HR to find it. And I sure as hell didn't trust Alex to understand why it mattered. The moment I knew I was past the point of no return was when I pulled my old laptop out of the closet. Not the company-issued one, my own, wiped clean, air-gapped from the network, secure as a vault. I loaded the encrypted snapshots onto it, then backed them up to a secondary offline drive. Then I made a dead man's switch. If I didn't log in every 72 hours, the drive would automatically send a decryption key to 3 separate email addresses. My lawyer, a journalist I'd met at a compliance conference, and my sister. Because I wasn't just archiving anymore. I was preparing for the day they tried to erase me too. Let's be clear, I didn't want to use any of it. I still hoped, foolishly maybe, that someone upstairs would finally see what was happening. That the grown-ups would come back. That Alex would get shuffled into a corner office, and someone with a spine and a brain would take the wheel. But hope doesn't keep you safe when the building's on fire. Backup drives do. So I kept copying. Every deletion he made, I mirrored. Every change to a policy file, I preserved the original. Every lie in the system, I time-stamped its birth certificate. Quietly, obsessively, like a forensic pathologist building a case for a crime not yet reported. Because if they were going to bury the truth, I'd be the one keeping the map. The meeting request came through at 7:42 a.m. sharp. Subject line: routine check-in, policy compliance review, sent from HR, carbon copied to IT. The calendar invite that practically reeked of something rotting beneath the corporate carpet. I'd seen this dance before. HR doesn't schedule routine meetings unless someone's got their finger on a trigger. I clicked accept, then stared at the screen long enough to watch the mouse cursor start blinking like a warning light. My gut tightened. Not panic, just pressure, like the air thickens a second before a thunderclap. Something was moving behind the walls. I'd finally tripped the sensor. An hour later, I got the second signal. A sales admin I barely knew, Jason from Tier 2 support, sent me a Slack message with a single line. "Hey, just a heads up. Your account got flagged in last night's bandwidth audit. Big spike. You doing some cleanup?" I typed back, "Just backups." He replied with a thumbs up emoji, and then nothing else. That's when I knew they were watching. See, Jason wasn't the type to care about audits unless someone told him to. which meant Alex had finally noticed the data trail I'd been leaving behind, or at least suspected. He wouldn't understand the backups, wouldn't grasp encryption hashes or version control, or why having 3 copies of a regulatory memo might actually be a smart thing when half the compliance framework had been duct-taped together with Slack threads and blind optimism. No, to Alex, large downloads looked like theft, treason, disloyalty, probably a felony in his Silicon Valley cosplay brain. I kept my face blank and my hands steady. Clicked through the open tickets, replied to a finance lead's request for historical vendor logs, approved a permissions change for the procurement tool. All while my fingers moved like muscle memory to one final task, syncing the last encrypted compliance set to the off-network drive. One more copy of every deletion he thought was buried. Every override, every shortcut, every late-night access spike with his name on it. I gave the folder a name. Doctrine. Just in case I never got to explain it myself. That's when he cornered me near the break room. I was pouring the dregs of a sad pot of decaf into a cracked company mug when I felt him behind me. That kind of energy that makes the hairs on your neck stiffen like they're tuning into static. I turned slow. Alex stood there, smiling like a cat who just figured out where the bird feeder was. "I know what you're doing," he said. I let the silence hang. Let him fill it with whatever conspiracy his half-cooked brain had cooked up overnight. "You've been moving files, personal drive." I had IT check. "Company policy allows for local compliance archives with encryption." He snorted. "You think hiding behind protocol will save you?" "I think following it will." I took a sip of coffee. It tasted like ashes. He stepped closer. Voice dropped to that faux-threatening whisper the worst kind of people use when they've never faced real consequences. "You're not as smart as you think. You're not protected. When this lands, it's going to land on you." And in that moment, I wasn't afraid. I was done. Done hoping someone upstairs would grow a backbone. Done patching holes in the hull while the captain drilled new ones. Done playing janitor for a digital crime scene. I looked him in the eye and said, "If you're that sure, file the paperwork." He blinked. Didn't expect that. He wanted me rattled, defensive, guilty. Instead, I walked past him, calm, final. Back at my desk, the backup finished syncing. Green light, 100% verified. I pulled the drive, tucked it into my bag, wiped the temporary workspace. Disabled scripts, closed tabs, sent one last internal message to my personal email. A checksum note, nothing sensitive, just enough to prove that the file existed and that I had the integrity record. Then I waited. Not long. By 3:00 p.m., my calendar was blocked for the HR meeting. By 3:01, the company's internal Slack was already whispering rumors, half-truths, slack-jawed gossip about how I was downloading trade secrets, planning to go rogue, maybe even building a case to sue. People I'd mentored were suddenly silent when I passed them in the hallway. My name had become radioactive. And still, I said nothing, because while they were busy writing the narrative, I was holding the receipts. Every one of them neatly labeled, securely stored, triple-backed up, and encrypted so tightly that not even God himself could access them without the key. The betrayal wasn't shocking. Not really. What surprised me most? How calm I felt, like watching a wave crash from behind glass. You see the destruction coming, but you're not in it anymore. You're already somewhere else. The ambush was theatrical. Conference room C, the one with the flickering fluorescent that never got fixed, suddenly dressed for drama. Department heads in folding chairs, Vanets and HR posted like Secret Service, and Alex at the far end of the table, arms folded like a budget Bond villain. I walked in holding a notepad and a reusable water bottle, thinking this was the routine compliance check-in rescheduled from yesterday. No one told me I was the main act. Alex didn't even wait for the door to close behind me. He stood up so fast, his chair screeched back against the carpet. "You've been downloading files to your personal drive. That's theft." The room froze. Not one whisper, not a single cough. Just wide eyes. Everyone had been handed a front row ticket to a public execution and were too stunned to look away. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I just set the notepad on the table like I had all the time in the world. He continued, "Chesn." Puffed, voice shaking with adrenaline and delusion. "We have logs, bandwidth reports. You've been copying proprietary data without authorization." HR nodded along, lips pursed, eyes flicking to their binder like they'd rehearsed this. "You're done here," Alex said. "Effective immediately." I looked at the stack of paperwork on the table. A printed log summary with timestamps, bandwidth totals, one-page excerpts from the security team's report, conveniently lacking any detail about the content or purpose of the downloads. They didn't care what I copied, just that I copied. Context be damned. Intent irrelevant. They weren't interested in facts. They wanted a headline. Security breach neutralized. Rogue employee contained. Alex needed a scapegoat before someone upstream noticed the integrity gaps in his new infrastructure. And I was the perfect target. Quiet, experienced, no political allies. Easy to paint as a bitter lifer hoarding files for revenge. I took a breath, let the silence do the heavy lifting. Then wordlessly, I reached into my bag and pulled out the company-issued laptop, powered it down, disconnected from the VPN, removed the charger cable with deliberate calm and placed it on the table. Next came the badge, still warm from my pocket. I slid it across like a poker chip, face down. Then the phone, company-issued, cracked screen, battery always hovering at 11%. I placed it beside the others, a little graveyard of tools that had kept the company afloat longer than most people in the room had been employed. HR cleared her throat. "If you could just confirm your understanding of the termination clause," I cut her off. Not loudly, not with anger, just enough. "It's all on there." I nodded toward the laptop. Every file, every download, every version. "You'll want your lawyer, Satis." The words hung in the air like the smell of burnt toast. Subtle, acrid, signaling something had already gone wrong. Alex scoffed. "We've already looped in legal." I smiled. Not a smirk. Just the expression you wear when you know something they don't. The bomb's already ticking, and they haven't even noticed the wires under the table. "No," I said quietly. "You haven't." There was a flicker in HR's eyes. Doubt. Recognition. Maybe both. I stood, took my water bottle, and walked out. No shouting, no argument, no attempt to defend myself. They wanted a story. Let them write it. Let them parade it through Slack threads and closed-door debriefs. Let them pat Alex on the back and say, "Good catch, kid. Really cleaned house." Meanwhile, the truth was sealed in a drive they now owned but didn't understand. Encrypted, authenticated, time-stamped, and hash-verified. The receipts were sitting in his lap, and he couldn't read a word of it. That morning, I'd already triggered the final sync. The backup had completed at 7:06 a.m. A secondary key had been dispatched to legal, one level up, someone who hadn't been looped in, someone who might actually read. They hadn't just fired the only person who knew how to hold the data together. They'd fired the only person who did. As I walked past reception, the security guard gave me a look, half sympathy, half confusion. I gave him a nod, said nothing. I didn't need to. The show was over. The fallout hadn't even begun. I didn't cry. I didn't scream into a pillow. I didn't call my sister or pour wine into a coffee mug and spiral through old emails looking for closure. Instead, I walked into my apartment, dropped my bag by the door, fed my cat, and sat down at my desk like I was clocking in for night shift. No one knew I still worked. The laptop I'd handed over was one version of the truth. This one, the personal air-gapped relic I'd kept stashed in a drawer under an expired passport, and a Ziploc bag of old charger cables, held the truth they didn't know existed. Not yet, but they would. I logged in, authenticated the drive, double-checked the timestamps, the hash logs, the final folder tree. It was all there. Every deleted log, every compliance override, every file that had mysteriously gone missing after Alex's dashboard updates. Nothing altered, nothing embellished, just reality preserved exactly as it had happened. Then I opened my email and composed the quietest detonation I've ever sent in my life. To legal.counsel@companyname.com. Subject: Regulatory Archive, Urgent Review. Body: please open the attached, encryption the key before Friday morning. The contents pertain to imminent compliance exposure. If you choose not to engage, I've fulfilled my obligation. Attachment: a single text file, 64-character decryption key, verified. I hit send. Then I closed the lid, stood up, and made dinner. That night, the news broke. I saw it first in a trade journal, buried beneath headlines about IPO delays and tech layoffs. Mid-tier SaaS provider to undergo surprise regulatory inspection. Whistleblower activity suspected. By midnight, it had spread to our local business wire. A short, bloodless article citing internal audit irregularities, access log inconsistencies, and gaps in quarterly reporting transparency. I sat on my couch, half watching the news, ticker the scroll by, while my cat pawed at the empty box the router came in. No panic, no glee, just the warm, quiet pulse of knowing the timeline had finally caught up. Somewhere inside that building, I knew what was happening. Lights on past midnight, phones ringing, someone in HR flipping through my personnel file, looking for reasons they could put in writing. IT trying to piece together the file architecture I'd safeguarded for over a decade without a roadmap, without me, without a clue. And legal was sweating, because there's nothing like a surprise inspection to peel the paint off a company's fake integrity. Especially when your most recent security breach just handed you the only uncorrupted compliance trail left standing. I imagined Alex in his glass office, pacing in circles, probably Googling terms like retroactive access logs and can deleted files be restored after termination? I could picture him getting no answers and being told, "We're reviewing materials that were just sent over. Please stand by." Stand by. There's a phrase you never want to hear when your house is already on fire. The real kicker? I wasn't the whistleblower, at least not technically. I didn't file the report. Didn't alert the agency. Didn't even forward the documents beyond legal. All I did was preserve the evidence, make sure that if and when the roof collapsed, no one could pretend they didn't hear the beams cracking weeks before. But I knew what they'd assume. The timing, the backups, the clean exit, let them. Because whether it was fate, karma, or some other cosmic auditor finally punching in for duty, the machine was now eating its own wiring. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel responsible for stopping it. Let them search, let them dig through the systems they thought they'd upgraded. Let them try to rebuild a compliance archive from dashboards built for show and not survival. Let them realize the one person who actually understood the architecture had been publicly humiliated, shoved out the door and dismissed as a data thief. By the time the sun came up, they'd been knee-deep in broken trails and missing disclosures, unable to answer a single regulator's question with certainty. They wanted me gone. Now they had to live with what I'd taken with me. Nothing and everything. The lawyer's name was Grayson. I'd only met him twice. Once, during a late-night call about a subpoena, and once during a fire drill where he mistook the break room for the exit. He wasn't flashy. Not one of those make a deal before breakfast types, more like the guy who triple checks every clause and highlights footnotes in 6 colors. A quiet watcher, the kind of man who doesn't say much until he has to. At precisely 8:04 a.m., his laptop pinged. New message. Subject: Regulatory Archive, urgent review. He read the body, frowned, then opened the attached key, pasted it into the decryption prompt and waited. When the archive opened, his screen filled with folders, hundreds of them, each one time-stamped, each name clean, surgical, impossible to misunderstand. Vendor overrides Q3. Deleted accessor logs June. Backdated approvals. Alex unfiled penalty waivers. And then dead center. One folder that made his throat close like a trap snapping shut. Suppressed legal incident, not closed. He clicked it. Inside, a PDF memo from an internal legal consultant dated 2 years prior, marked confidential, outlining in brutal detail how a third-party vendor had violated federal data retention laws on their system. The company was warned, told to suspend work with the vendor until full remediation. But the report had been closed manually. Override signature. Alex. No follow-up, no disclosure, no audit trail. Buried, forgotten until now. Grayson closed the laptop, then opened it again, reread the document, checked the metadata, verified the digital signature chain. The blood drained from his face like someone had opened a trapdoor in his spine. Across the hall, Legal Ops was scrambling to compile documents for the incoming regulators. Grayson stood slowly, like he was walking underwater, and stepped into the chaos without a word. He didn't yell, didn't demand. He placed the laptop on the central table and said, "I need everyone to stop what they're doing and look at this." Someone laughed, already drowning. "What now?" He spun the screen around. Silence. Pages and pages of untouched evidence scrolled down the screen like a confession unraveling in real time. Disclosures that had never been disclosed. Violations that had been resolved on paper, but not in reality. Cover-ups signed with Alex's digital fingerprint. And all of it preserved in crystal clear clarity by the very person they'd branded a thief less than 24 hours earlier. Grayson didn't speak for a full 30 seconds. Then carefully, he said, "She didn't steal this. She saved it." Another lawyer whispered, "Where did she get all this?" Grayson didn't answer because the better question, the one clawing its way through every brain in that room was, how close had they come to losing it all? Meanwhile, I was 3 miles away, sipping lukewarm diner coffee, reading the paper, and pretending not to notice the 3 different voicemails blinking on my phone. I didn't listen to them. I didn't need to, because I knew how Grayson thought. I knew that once he saw the drive, saw the care, the accuracy, the intent behind it. Not malice, not sabotage, just truth. He'd understand exactly what they'd done. I hadn't burned the company down. I'd stopped them from throwing themselves into the fire. And now, the only record keeping them out of a courtroom sat on a laptop they once thought was evidence of my guilt. I didn't feel proud or smug or vindictive. I felt quiet, like a burden had been set down after 11 years of being the only one carrying it. Hang it. Let them scramble now. Let them fight to understand the structure I'd built, silently beneath their shiny dashboards and ego-fed workflows. Let them realize that the person they humiliated in front of half the company had never once tried to harm them. She only tried to protect what they were too arrogant to see slipping through their fingers. And now they were going to need me more than ever. At exactly 12:02 p.m., the elevator dinged and 4 people in federal windbreakers stepped into the lobby like they'd been summoned by fate or an encrypted drive. They didn't make a scene. No barking orders. No handcuffs. Just calm, practiced authority. Clipboards, laptops, badges flashed with all the subtlety of a loaded gun on a dinner table. The receptionist stammered. Someone from IT stood up, sat back down like he'd forgotten how legs worked. The lead agent spoke one sentence. "We're here for the compliance review. We've already notified General Counsel." No one said a word. By 12:05, legal was ushering them into the main boardroom. By 12:07, panic had begun to ferment in the corridors like sour milk. Compliance reviews don't happen unannounced unless someone somewhere has reason to believe your entire house of cards is about to cave. At 12:12, Alex was locked out of the system. He didn't see it coming. He was mid-email when his Slack kicked him out. The VPN disconnected, and the access badge reader outside Legal Suite blinked red instead of green. When he buzzed the front desk, they told him he was to wait outside until further notice. He paced, slammed his fist against the glass, demanded to speak with the CEO. The CEO didn't respond. He was already inside the boardroom, seated stiffly across from 2 federal auditors and a visibly pale Grayson. On the table between them sat my drive, still plugged into the laptop, fan whirring quietly like a heartbeat echoing through an ICU. They were combing through folders I'd named months ago. Q2 access exceptions, security clearance overrides, GDPR deviation memo. Files that no longer existed in the active systems because Alex had decommissioned half of them in his crusade to modernize. Now, every missing document, every disappeared approval. Every overwritten log suddenly reappeared, crystal clear, intact, time-stamped, and traced back to actions taken under Alex's digital signature. At 12:25, one of the auditors looked up and asked, "Why were these records not disclosed in your last submission?" The CEO had no answer. Meanwhile, HR was unraveling in the adjacent conference room. Apparently, no one had cleared my termination with legal. No one had reviewed the internal termination protocol. No confirmation of cause. No risk assessment. Just a signature from HR, a nod from Alex, and an eager little internal memo that declared I was exiting under suspected data misconduct. That phrase, now that the real story had surfaced, wasn't just reckless. It was liable. Head of HR, Marissa, a clipboard addict with a history of deflecting upward, was sweating through her blouse. She barked orders at subordinates, demanded a copy of the termination packet, and then promptly dropped it when she realized Grayson had already seen it. By 1:00 p.m., word had spread. People weren't speaking openly, but you could feel it in the air. The sudden shift from gossip to reverence. My name no longer whispered like a cautionary tale, but now muttered like a prayer. She saved all that. I thought she got caught stealing. Wait, she had the logs. Why didn't anyone check before firing her? No one had answers, just excuses. The CEO stayed silent through most of the audit review, watched as Isa's folder after folder opened on the screen. As every lie, every deletion, every shortcut exposed itself without drama, without exaggeration, just undeniable fact, preserved by someone they'd publicly branded a liability. And through it all, I wasn't there. I wasn't in the building. I wasn't on the call. I wasn't refreshing Slack or watching LinkedIn for breadcrumbs of validation. I was at a bookstore thumbing through a paperback I'd read 10 years ago and finding it better the second time. Because that was the point. They hadn't just fired me. They had nearly erased the only thing tethering them to legal survival. Their entire corporate credibility now hinged on documents they had mocked, deleted, or buried. And only I had saved them. My absence was a presence. Every folder they opened, mine. Every violation revealed, one I'd caught before it detonated. Every answer they could give the feds, written in my silent handwriting, time-stamped, signed and shelved for a day just like this. They hadn't burned the place down. They'd tossed the extinguisher out the window before they realized the fire was in the walls. The boardroom was soundproof, but you could feel the silence from the hallway. 12 people seated around an oval table that had hosted a decade of acquisitions, investor pitches, and high-stakes bluffing games, now reduced to a quiet tomb lit by overhead fluorescence and one open laptop. On its screen, the folder labeled Suppressed Legal Incident, not closed. Blinking like a lighthouse over jagged rocks. Grayson didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. She saved us from willful destruction of compliance evidence, he said, voice flat, final. If she hadn't preserved these files, every timestamp, every version control receipt, every access log we thought had been archived, we wouldn't be negotiating with regulators right now. We'd be indicted. The CFO exhaled hard enough to fog his glasses. Someone from Risk whispered, "Criminal exposure, like DOJ?" Grayson nodded. Easily. Especially with that vendor override. Especially with that suppressed incident. Alex's override signature is on 3 of the highest violation items. That's obstruction, If not now, then retroactively, depending on how the feds view the deletion trails. Across the table, Alex sat pale and motionless. For the first time in his brief, disastrous reign, he had nothing to say. The CEO looked at him, his own son, with an expression that couldn't decide between shame, horror, and something dangerously close to fear. His voice came out like it had to crawl over broken glass to escape his throat. "What have you done?" No answer. What could Alex say? That he thought her backups were just a power trip. That he was cleaning up legacy junk. That he thought compliance meant clicking yes on a dashboard he built in a week with zero versioning logic. The truth sat in front of them, neatly labeled, hash verified, and saved by the one person they'd humiliated and discarded like tech they didn't understand. That afternoon, the settlement meeting was held. No press, no lawyers on her side, just an offer slid across a sleek wooden table. Grayson was present, of course, and one senior partner who looked like he hadn't slept since the auditors walked in. "We want to thank you," the partner said quietly, discreetly. She didn't nod, didn't smile. "We'd like to retain limited use rights to the compliance archives, specifically the forensic files, original merged data logs, and legal correspondence snapshots." A pause. "7 figures," Grayson added. "Tax advantage, you'll be under NDA. We'll acknowledge the chain of custody and retroactively correct your termination status in writing." She leaned back, didn't ask for more, didn't gloat. She just said, "Put it in writing and don't call again." And that was that. She kept the company. They avoided collapse. The CEO spun it as proactive cooperation, and Alex was quietly reassigned to a non-operational role in an international venture that didn't exist outside of an HR document. No apology ever came. But neither did another betrayal. Weeks later, she sat in a quiet co-working space above a bakery that smelled like cinnamon and freedom. No security badges, no panic ping emails, just a laptop, her own login, and the blissful sound of no one else's mess to clean up. A colleague she barely knew walked in, an old contact from her freelance compliance work, and slid a plain white folder across the table. On it, founding partner agreement. She opened it. Inside, her name. Above it, principal advisor, compliance and ethics infrastructure. Under it, equity. Her hands didn't shake. Her pulse didn't spike. She didn't bring the old company down. She just made sure they couldn't drag her with them when they hit the wall. And now she was building something they could never touch. Big thanks, you legends of the old office days. Subscribe to keep the switch-flicking chaos alive. Your ex-boss is shaking in their loafers.